So questions to our panelists. Bedouin, why don't we start with you? As a computational specialist and senior project leader at MVRDV, how are you currently deploying the 15-minute city framework in your firm's work?
Yeah, so I think that the 15-minute city framework is something that's actually already something we embraced at MVRDV since the start of the firm, as it advocates for denser and greener and more social environments since the start, and it's kind of the basis of every project we do and how we start them. One example is, for example, the Sky Garden project in Seoul, where it connects the city by transforming car-based infrastructure into a green network and pedestrianizing the city in a way. And in my work, I create digital tools that help in realize the ambitions for those design projects, where I develop algorithms to help with interpreting data or help analyze specific ambitions to provide insight on how to realize these ambitions. And each project needs its own specific approach. Every context is different, and every culture also defines the qualities you're looking for in a different way. For example, one person might define a pleasant space as a space with wind, a nice breeze, sun on your face, some trees to sit under if it gets too warm, something that's more tranquil, while someone else would define a pleasant space as maybe something more vibrant, where you can meet people, play a game, where you can dance to music. And these things in a city, especially once it gets very dense, these things will likely need to happen in the same place, and even that sometimes they will have to happen at the same time. And we can use our tools to create insight in what could be good directions to investigate in our design process. So we do this by uncovering trends using these computational design methods that lead to good results and to inform the design process. We model scenarios to investigate, in the example that I just gave, the flexibility of such a space, and to see if all the ingredients that we think are important are matched, and if we need to add something that's missing.
So using computational tools to deal with the complexity of getting to a 15-minute city. That's very helpful. Exactly. What do you think are the key challenges for planning and monitoring progress? How can we make the best use of urban data to support the development of a 15-minute city?
We typically work in two types of scenarios. So if we work in existing cities, it's really about helping local authorities understand the baseline and where do they even start and how is their investment equitable. So for that, we need kind of data platform and evidence in order to understand where you place these interventions. But when we're working on completely new areas, on large-scale urban master plans and emerging economies, for example, where there's massive urban growth, what we try to do is actually have this outcome-focused approach to design, where we think about the outcomes and then try to design let's say, the least elements and least specific to achieve these outcomes. So we allow a lot of freedom for adaptability and changes over time of the design in more detail, but we get the things like the spatial network layout, distribution of infrastructure, and so on. We get that right, and we model that in advance, so we can model these outcomes like walkability, for example.
What do you see as the most exciting opportunities for using the 15-minute city?
I think that with the technologies and the techniques that we have at hand now that we can have access to, the opportunity of being able to represent not all our assumptions of what the people would need and what we could do for them, we can actually include real life scenarios based on data collected not only through crowdsourcing, but many different sources of data to be able to answer some specific questions and make models which are inherently, of course, there is bias in every data set, but maybe much more inclusive models which can replace many different assumptions. And this is for me a very big opportunity of that we have as designers right now, having access to many and a lot of public data sets.
And I think that actually takes us back to Bourdain's notion of intuitive softness. How do you take those big data sets and understand them in a way that's intuitive? Regarding computational design, many people are skeptical about the metaverse today. Many people are. Can you contribute? And in fact, I think the skepticism is growing by the day. Can you contribute anything of value to the advancement of the 15-minute city? Or sorry, can it contribute anything to the value of the advancement of the 15-minute city?
Yeah, it's like a super interesting and loaded question, Craig.
That's why we put it there.
Yeah, yeah. No, I mean, I think it's very interesting because in our work, we're interested in also something called the omniverse, which is the metaverse. If people don't know what it is, it's like a kind of fictional city that's not bounded by the constraints of reality. On the other hand, there's this like equally kind of aggressive, polarized movement towards what's called the omniverse, which is like the idea of making a perfect digital replica of the real world.
Of the real world, yeah.
And I think that's like a direct critique of the metaverse, so they're kind of critiques one another. And I think a very productive place where we try to situate our work is in between those poles.
I was going to say the intersection between them has a lot of fertile ground.
Yeah, so like in our work, what we see is that we're creating scenarios and imagining possibilities through computation that are rooted in the reality of today, but trying to project maybe 5 or 10 years in the future, looking at climate, looking at use. And so then I think it opens up some very powerful possibilities. So that's how we kind of situate metaverse in our thinking in the company.
Yeah, that's very helpful. And I think it's really clear that post-pandemic, the notion of the virtual universe is real. Like we're in a virtual conference right now with people all over the world speaking. So how do we map that onto omniverse, metaverse? There's just so much potential. We're going to go to some questions from the mayors that we polled, or mayors groups. One is coming from Stéphane Pierre, a planner in New York City, who asks, because it is so important to engage residents when developing a 15-minute framework, consultation, of course, what are the best ways to implement qualitative data and personal experiences?
If you look at, let's say, survey data of pedestrians, you get the kind of aggregate result of people's behavior. And often, we talk about stated preference and actual preference. So, people sometimes, if you ask them something, they would say something what they do sometimes, but it's not necessarily what they do every day. So we're very interested in looking over longer periods of time and looking at patterns and kind of the aggregate of people in order to understand what are the actual patterns which should determine the solutions. Of course, we're not predicting individuals' behavior, but we can design an environment which works best for most people most of the time. And then we can work in the detail to make it more interesting and diverse and so on. But I think stated preference versus actual preference is a very important discussion.
Actually, at the moment, we have a current ongoing project through one of my PhD students, Jem, where we are defining a new phase in the participation process, which is called post-participation phase, especially to go through a huge amount of qualitative data that is collected through participation processes that occur in almost every municipality in every city, where especially in the goal defining phase, where some goals are defined, some values goals are stated, a lot of different discussions take place in massive platforms. But through interviews with many city administrations, we have found out that this data is often not used because it is a massive data that is mostly text. And therefore, Yes, exactly. Therefore, we are using AI, natural language processing, as well as other visualization technologies, techniques, to create a transition between participation and post-participation, where the data and the various viewpoints can be presented to the people who are going to make use of this data in an actual implementation. So I believe there are huge opportunities for the future relating to this topic as well.
How far along are you with that? Is that something that is just in the study stage, or is it being implemented on any of the consultations that you're now doing?
Yes, it will be. Not yet, but we are, JAM is working with city administrations of 2 major cities in Europe. And one of these is has already a team which is looking into this, and he's working in an integrated way to have the mechanisms and the tools that he's developing implemented in their already existing platform. So this will become reality within 2 years, hopefully.
Thank you very much. Another question to the panel as a group coming from Washim Mahboub, a planner in Saudi Arabia, who asks, how can the 15-minute city concept be applied to completed neighborhoods? If so, what steps do you need to take? So instead of doing a master plan from the outset of something that is to be born in existing neighborhoods where there's a built fabric, what do we do? Who would like to take a stab at that?
It also links a lot to the previous question in a way that it really asks also a bit on the bottom-up part of how to gain information and how to change existing fabrics into, well, still the same materials, the same spaces, but have different functions. How to apply to completed neighborhoods is in a way you need to, I guess, go to these neighborhoods and just try out things and talk to the people. And this can be amplified through using technology to help out with creating models, scenarios, talking to people, visualizing ideas, and brainstorming about what you want to get from this new development.
One of the big nuts to crack, and this is in our practice, one of the things we're finding as we work with our clients in the 15-minute city framework, is existing fabric needs to be understood. It's a massive data set, and the new fabric that you're imagining has to be integrated with that. So Anna, can you speak to the challenges there and maybe opportunities?
Yeah, so we work a lot in existing places, and as you say, the most important thing is to start with the diagnosis. And in an existing place, you're locked in with a spatial structure. That spatial structure that determines your isochrones to, the distribution of your infrastructure and land uses. So from this, you can create a diagnosis in relation to where the population is located and understand how close or far away am I from the 15-minute city. And then when you have this diagnosis, you can see, okay, these are the areas which are already doing quite well. And these are the bits of the city which are really challenged, and it will be really, really hard to do something. So then you can look at a toolbox ranging from, long-term transport infrastructure, introducing public transport, things like that, to can you create some quick physical infrastructure wins by opening up a route or increasing connectivity in certain places, interconnecting networks, pedestrian routes, pedestrian bridges across what tends to be typical severance of motorways and things like that. But that's also still a very expensive thing to do. And then the other level is not forget the operational level of cities and working with different actors, like what Carlos Moreno talked about, using buildings for different purposes. So if you have a school in an area, but you don't have a health center, maybe you can have some space there in the afternoon for some groups to get together. Or in a place where it's hard to walk to work, can you organize some social services, some walking groups, some activities, social prescribing, things like that. So there's spatial and non-spatial and non-physical, more operational aspects as well. So use the whole toolbox, but first understand the problem.
just say from the perspective of building design, there's massive potential around building refurbishment. And for us, while we like focus on new build, the real potential of moving to like zero carbon is looking at the existing building stock and working with what we have already. And I think in terms of the potential of AI, there's kind of like two main opportunities. The first is, and you wouldn't suspect this, but the best opportunities for refurbishment is actually identifying owners who own multiple properties who can refurbish all at the same time. So actually that's kind of like a tricky thing to find out, like where do we do this sort of like renovation, because it's very hard to do just like one building at a time. And then the second part, which may or may not like relate to the 15-minute city, is really in terms of like the materiality, the types of materials that you're using. Can you reuse materials? You know, what's available, what's the structure of the building, and what type of structure can it be adapted? Can we adapt the use? Can we change the program of that building to?
But it does relate to embodied carbon and greenhouse gas emissions for sure.
Yeah, so I think it becomes super interesting because everything is kind of connected. Like James had said earlier, like just from the structure of a building, like choices that were made 50 years ago, it opens up possibilities in terms of how something might be adapted tomorrow. So these are all kind of like connected topics, but like where AI I think can really help is identifying what are the best opportunities for this sort of like redevelopment.
Yeah, and it
like individual building
keeps
level.
bringing us back to Baudouin's comment about intuitive and softness, because I think one of the things that really is a barrier for a lot of people, especially stakeholders that are not professionals in this area, to understanding the situation is that sort of complexity and vastness of data. And so that having AI or some set of tools that you can make the data more intuitive and soft, I think is a really, really compelling idea. Sejo or Julie, do we have a question from the audience that seems to fit into this category?
I can ask one. How does data-driven urbanism react to the unpredictability of pedestrian movement?
We were looking at how the design of pedestrian walkways can influence the comfort of its users. And in this case, comfort is referring to stress, which is caused by crowdedness. So we did quite a comprehensive study. I was collaborating with transport engineers as well as cognitive scientists on this. And through collecting many different types of data, from pedestrian counts and generating pedestrian flows to on-site experiments with real pedestrians, to VR experiments where you change certain design variables and test how this will affect the perception, we found that actually, very interestingly, people, the crowdedness. So if for example, when pedestrians are choosing a route within in an indoor environment, going from A to B, crowdedness of that pathway, visible crowdedness, doesn't seem to affect their choice of avoiding the crowd and going into the non-crowded space, which we would assume is causing less stress, because crowdedness is causing stress. But yet people don't seem to pick the less crowded path. So this obviously needs further research and further understanding of the behavior. But these kind of findings are not intuitive. This is what I was trying to refer to, like we can replace our assumptions with understanding these behaviors and understanding these behavioral hypotheses and relating them to spatial organizational aspects. So I guess this is a direction where these studies can go.
Pedestrian movement is quite predictable. It's a bit counterintuitive, but it is very predictable, and it's something to do with people generally are very economic with their energy, or you could also say less diplomatically lazy, and most of the time they want to go from A to B the most kind of convenient way, and they accept quite a high degree of stresses in that process. So I think there's the balance between where is the kind of pedestrian comfort and understanding, okay, this is the most likely route people are going to take. So these are the routes we should really work hard to make the quality high, because we want people to be healthy and enjoy their walk as well. But we won't get people to walk different routes just to go to the places with more greenery. We should put the greenery where people are and help them to have like quick journeys to work and so on, and not ask them to go like a long way through the park to have a nice time.
Based on your experience, how accessible are these computational tools to, say, someone living in a small town or a rural area? Are you thinking of these types of settlements?
And you know what? Why don't we paraphrase that question?
Yeah.
How accessible may mean, how accessible are they via virtual accessibility, for example, on the web? And how accessible are they to people that are not trained as computational designers or interpreters? I think there's probably two different issues there. Who wants to speak to that?
My sister-in-law studies or was studying city planning, and she lives in a small town in Canada, and she said that many of these concepts are like you're not able to apply it at that scale because maybe the training is not available, or it's also cost prohibitive because a lot of like the big firms or like big developments are using these technologies. And so actually this is kind of like a comment, it's not really like an answer, but she said it's really like nice to see like our work and then just trying to make something accessible, to make it visual in terms of the 15-minute city, to make it explainable to maybe people who wouldn't have access. So
Baudouin, you're the computational design geek on the panel today. So
thanks.
So what do you think? That's a compliment, right? So what do you think about access to these kind of tools? I mean, this is what you swim in, but what about people in Sage-El's small town in Canada somewhere? How does a planner there get access to it?
Yeah, I think this is a huge challenge for these types of design tools. If you want to make these things accessible to everyone, to be able to have also the information that comes from these small towns or rural villages, if they're able to use these technologies, they can also provide us with information on how to build it from there, instead of building it from, I don't know, New York style scale back to the 15-minute city. If you already start with a 15-minute town, how to keep that going and to grow that into something into something bigger. So I think this is really a challenge for technology to fit that.
Yeah, and you know, this was such an open-ended question with no right answer. Maybe you can be the one to sort of champion this debate on the LinkedIn page with the questions coming in, because I think it's a real challenge. I mean, the tools that I'm hearing and the conceptualization that I'm hearing today, they're very sophisticated, and to have real purchase in the world, they have to become more common. So I think this is something that we'll want to aim at as a group potentially.